Hi, my name is Pamela Fuselli, and I'm the host of Popping the Bubble Wrap. Are you the person in your family who worries about the safety of others, about buying safety products and using them? Are you yelling, "Yes, that's me"? Then this is the podcast for you. Raising a child or children can be a hair-raising undertaking, and keeping them safe is your priority. Parachute's Popping the Bubble Wrap podcast explores what you really need to think about and provides easy tips on prevention strategies. No bubble wrap here, though. Did you know that 20% of your TikTok feed is highly likely to contain misinformation? That's 1 in every 5 TikToks you watch. In our world today, it's so easy to rely on social media, like Instagram and TikTok, as sources for information, including information that impacts our health and well-being. The important thing to remember is that advice can sound good, but can actually be harmful. In today's bonus episode, we're going to take a pause to talk about how to know who to trust, about information and misinformation, and some key questions to ask yourself when you see advice online. Dr. Natasha Collia, known as Dr. Tash online, is a pediatric emergency medicine doctor and simulation educator at SickKids, and she joins me again today. Welcome, Dr. Tash.
Thank you so much, Pamela, for having me back on this podcast. It's always a pleasure to join these important conversations.
I'm really looking forward to our discussion. The places where parents get information has expanded well beyond friends and family into the wild world of social media. And we know it's difficult to know who to trust and where good information is going to come from. There's a fair amount of peer pressure or social desirability displayed online, and we usually only see the good stuff that people want us to see when they post online. Dr. Tash, you've waded into this online world. What prompted you to add social media influencer to your role as doctor?
Maybe because I didn't realize what it would entail at the end of the day. I'm just kidding. I think first and foremost and above all, I'm a pediatric emergency medicine doctor. I see firsthand how crucial accurate information is for parents in making decisions about their children's health. I decided to venture into the online world as a social media influencer because I recognize that the immense potential of these kind of platforms to reach and educate a broader audience. And specifically in the emergency department, I was noticing that we just didn't have the amount of time that we wanted to have with parents to kind of have these discussions in detail, just given the nature of the environment that we work in. And social media just has allowed me to provide reliable evidence-based information directly to parents outside of the emergency department, helping to cut through the noise and misinformation that I hear parents come into the ER telling me about. So ultimately, it was to create a trustworthy space where parents find accurate information, practical advice, and eventually empowers them to make informed decisions about their children's well-being.
And ultimately, that's what we want them to do. We want them to be empowered so that they know where to find good information when they need it. And
absolutely,
social media is now being used like a search engine for news and for information like child safety and other health-related information. What do you want parents to know about the information that they find online?
There's the skeptic in me, and then there's the professional in me. So I'm going to start with just the rise of social media has revolutionized how much we access information, just like you said. But with that convenience, unfortunately, comes the challenge of distinguishing between credible sources from misinformation. So what I want parents to know is that not all information that they find online is created equally. It's essential to really approach online information with a critical eye. Have the same questioning attitude towards information you see equally. And what I mean by that is if you're going to, speak to your physician and question your physician and their information they provide you, take that same questioning attitude and apply that to every single thing you do. So that's pretty much my one ask. I ask any parent who comes to me with, other options, other things that they've seen, other things that they feel may have helped, their mother's, grandmother's friend, because we do hear that a lot. And I will never say to someone, that's ridiculous, that's stupid. I will say, where did you get that information? Let's talk about why you're so drawn to that information. And what's the reasoning that you feel that that information is better than what I'm providing you? And let's get to the root of that. So parents and anyone in that fact should carry that same questioning attitude and mentality. And I call it attitude in a way, like, because it's empowering you to everything you see that's not extensively studied, evidence-based, or recognized as undergoing heavy evaluation. And that's claiming, this is the next best cure. This is the next best treatment. This is going to be quick, easy, simple, fast. We've got it for you. I feel like I'm doing an infomercial right now, and it feels very awkward in the process. But that's really what I want parents to know. It's not equal. Not everyone who's putting information out there is truly who they may seem to be. And we just want to be able to, in this conversation, come up with a plan for parents and a structure for how to process that and how do we get through it so it's not overwhelming.
And what's been the reaction when you have, given them information that maybe goes against what they had learned either from friends or family or online? Are they receptive to that?
I like that question because I think that question in itself goes back to discovering the root of, why people have become so open to other information from someone who could be making a TikTok video across the world. And I will say, thankfully for me, the majority of parents that I have spoken to have been quite receptive. And I think it also comes down, not like tooting my own horn, but I think it's more of my approach has always been why, how, where did you get it? What drove you to that information? What makes you feel that that would be better than something we've talked about? And I will always sit down and talk about the fallacies because I think it's important that we talk about it. And sometimes in that process, you kind of learn a little bit more about the who, what, where, when, hows, and whys. And that helps you direct the conversation in a way that could be receptive or could be not receptive. And at the end of the day, I know I've walked away with providing a family with all the information they need, regardless of the choice that they make.
Yeah, and I think that's a respectful and again, going back to the goal of empowering them is to not tell them what is right, but help them with the process of how they can assess this information.
Yeah.
Who is the messenger? Where is their information coming from? Is it only from the product company that's promoting this device or product? And unfortunately, as much as we'd love it to be true, if it's too good to be true, it usually is.
It truly is, because I sometimes want to say it and I say it in a way that's not humorous necessarily, where it feels like you're poking fun at someone for how can you believe that? Because truthfully, a lot of this is rooted in fear. There's fear tactics there. And we know that fear drives us to make decisions and blinds us. And we hear this from people who in the pandemic were very driven by misinformation and have all of a sudden come out of it. And now they're advocates for, these are ways that you can prevent yourself from doing that. And I almost say in a way of do you think that this person, truthfully, we call it true talk, do you think that this person who has no scientific background, who claims that they are a scientist but maybe did 1 year of med school and then never continued, who doesn't work in a lab, who doesn't have a rigorous system, you think that they found the cure to something that we have been working so hard for many, many years? And it almost makes people stop and go, oh, that's a good way of putting it.
And sometimes the solutions that we have, especially in injury prevention, are so simple that it almost seems like that can't just be the cure. When you go back to, the pandemic and COVID, washing your hands, wearing a mask, it's like, it can't be that easy. It's got to be something more complicated.
Absolutely.
And in public health, a lot, it is the simple solution. So what should parents pay attention to? And what should they keep scrolling by? We just keep thumbing up, swiping up.
We all know that we cannot prevent ourselves to come home after a long day and scroll. And I want people to recognize that context of, when do you scroll the most? When you're tired, when you're bored, when you're stressed, when you just want to disconnect, right? So that is a time where if you're any of those emotions, what they're going to do is do something that's going to grab your attention. And then once they grab your attention once, it continues. So let's talk about your first part of your question when you said, what should parents pay attention to? So when I talk about what should parents pay attention to is look for information that comes from credible and authoritative sources. So look for content from well-established health organizations, academic institutions, professionals with verified, and I'm going to say verified credentials in the field, and pay attention to posts that actually help provide evidence-based information, including references to reputable studies and other balanced, I'm going to say the other word, balanced perspectives. So there are very big keywords in what I'm saying there. So established, credentialed. I'm not talking was credentialed and then their license was taken away, which we can all look online for that. Evidence-based and balanced. Balance is super key in terms of, even more authority and also not trying to be out of this world amazing and exceptional to the user or the person scrolling. And the other part to what we should also pay attention to is there is an increased use of the awareness and the importance of regulatory referencing. So for instance, the U.S. Food and Drug Administration name dropping, that happens a lot. And there's a significant difference between FDA approval and FDA review or registration. So FDA approval means that the FDA has determined the benefits of the product outweighs the risk for the intended use based on rigorous testing and evaluation. On the other hand, FDA review or registration may simply indicate that the FDA has acknowledged the product, but has not evaluated its safety and or efficacy in any way. And so just because a product has been registered or reviewed, remember it has not gone through regulatory testing. And also know that US does not necessarily mean it's approved in Canada. Each country has its own regulatory standards.
I think that's key too, because there are products that are sold in the US that are, for instance, banned in Canada, like baby walkers with wheels, but you can still buy those and have them shipped to your Canadian address. You can buy it from anywhere around the world with the global, purchasing ability now. And so I think that's really important. And so parents should look for the approval piece on the FDA side of things and look for reputable places like Canadian Medical Association, Canadian Pediatric Society, that Health Canada, Transport Canada, those types of agencies.
And for the U.S. people who may be tuning in, American Academy of Pediatrics is another big one, specifically about pediatrics. But you have a lot of reputable hospitals that that really can put out lots of information. I will say though, while we're talking about that, because we're also talking about what should they scroll by, I'm going to say there's always a caveat to the reputable source. And I'm going to go back to what we've talked about before, which is a lot of people can say, I'm a doctor, I'm a scientist. And if you do a deep dive and deep search in some of these individuals, you'll realize that their license was banned, it was restricted, it was taken away from them. And there is something about that. It's not because, they were a whistleblower and they were right, so everyone's trying to shush them. There is a reason why. And our license don't get just taken away just because. You have to have something happen or do something that goes against, practice that is safest for the individuals. So those are the ones I would say pause and really look, because all our licenses and what's happening with them are all online. So if that's something people didn't know, it's easy to look at. But if I were to specifically say what to keep scrolling by, I know it's hard. I know it's really, really hard. The ones that are in your face, exciting, using sensational language, making extreme or absolute claims without evidence, just trust me. This is going to be the best thing that ever happened to you. This is going to be the solution to all your problems, or comes from sources, which we talked about, lack of credibility. But be cautious, most importantly, of information that is overly commercialized or linked always to selling a product. So that didn't work, but we've got the solution for you. Oh my God, I feel like I'm actually doing some of these. And the last one we talked about was the fear component. If they start with something like, did your child have an illness that was never treated? Did your family member die of this disease? If it starts with that, it's a little concerning that the way they are approaching you, just like if someone approached you on the side of the road or me in the emergency room, approached you as a parent and said something so egregious and so scary off the bat, you're going to be likely to pay more attention, but the way you pay attention is going to change depending on what's happening next. So if I say something like, did your previous child get hurt by this? Well, I have something to prevent that from happening again. Immediately, a parent's going to go, wow, that person knows what they're talking about, because it's not because it's logical. It's because they've tapped into that fear. And so, if, as you said, remember, something's too good to be true, it probably is. And always prioritize information that prioritizes your family's health and well-being. That's essentially what I tell families as well.
Because some of those posts, get you excited too. It's like, oh, well, every parent wants to keep their child safe. So if you're telling me you've got something that can do that and you're excited 100%. About it, and I'm scrolling and it's, as you say, it's very eye-catching, it's very in your face, absolutely watch it, learn about it. But I think what you're saying is like, do some due diligence. Now, I know that's really hard because parents have so much on their plate. But taking that extra step of figuring out, is this the product producer or manufacturer or seller? They obviously have a vested interest in it. Not to say that all of those are wrong, but It's one of those red flags that you would want to do some extra digging on to make sure that it is something that is evidence-based and credible.
Absolutely. And I think to add to what you're saying, Pam, to just fortify it one last little bit, is that I think people also approach this as, a very one way or the other when it comes to the evolution of new products, new treatments. That's not the case. The majority of us approach it as that right now has not been approved. It has not been tested. It has not been gone through rigorous testing. There is no safety that we know of, and we also don't know what the long-term potential effects of that is. So we're approaching it from, we do know what's tested and true. We know science and medicine evolves. But right now, you're choosing potentially an option that has had none of that information and risking, from that perspective, over something that we do know works, and potentially that in 20 years will. But we still don't have it. Like, it's going into it completely blind. And for me, that's a little bit more logical to choose the option that's not so blinded. But for many in this time of the way our healthcare is going, it does not surprise me. People are choosing that and feeling like they're being heard and their fears are being addressed. But again, something bad happens. There's no, what's the word I'm looking, accountability from those people who sold that product or who sold that equipment. There is none. There's nowhere to go back. Whereas if I do something, even with my best intentions, there is accountability, right? So that's the other scary part about all of this, that, you can't message them and be like, you did harm. They won't care.
Right. Right. And there's products that, might not work and might not do harm, or they may provide a false sense of security, or they may do harm and it may not be, as you said, it may not be immediately, it may be down the road and we don't know that. So there are a few products that I know that are promoted online that really cause you some concern. Tell me what catches your eye, what really concerns you of what you've seen online.
Can we take a break between, there's so many. I'm going to just start with a quick little list to remind parents that this is just this top of the iceberg. We've got everything from, here's the solution to your children's teething. Here's the solution to your respiratory illness with essential oils. Here's the quick fix for your child if they're choking. Here is the how to keep your child safe by supporting their neck only when they're out in the water. There's also the weighted blankets because, those are comfy for adults. Why shouldn't they be comfy for kids? These are just some of the most egregious commercialized marketing things that I have seen online that are very targeted towards pediatrics and patients and their families. And I have a lot of qualms with most of these, but let's start with the one that I get a lot, which is the teething. So as we know, teething is a big thing with parents, right? We don't want to see our children in pain. It causes a lot of distress, both for the patient, so the baby, and the parents. And there is a lot out there. What can you use? What can you not? This is a new product. This is the expensive product. This is the in product. And the in product right now is amber teething necklaces. And they're promoted as a quote unquote natural remedy to soothe teething pain in infants. I'm sure you've heard amber necklaces. I'm sure everyone has seen something on TikTok or seen someone on TikTok. So first of all, let's talk about why there's some fallacies to these. There's no scientific evidence that, these actually work. There's just another form of that, something for them to chew on. There's also potential for concern they talked about different acids that can be released from the amber, because they say it's the succinic acid that's released from the beads that provides any pain relief. These are all anecdotal. And what I mean by anecdotal, for anyone who doesn't know what the word means, it just means people say that they work. These necklaces, though, have shown to pose a significant choking and strangulation risk for infants. So now you're increasing their chances of either one or the other. And it makes them rather dangerous rather than beneficial. And there are plenty of reports online, if you look at a lot of the regulatory bodies, talking about actual reports of this happening. So the next question becomes, what's the recommended approach then? If you're going to tell me this doesn't work, Dr. Tash, what should I do? We will always use the same approach that has been tested and tried and true, which essentially is, using teething rings that are made of firm rubber, so nothing that can break off, nothing that's has chemicals on it. The other big one, and I just did a Instagram with a lovely dentist, massaging the baby's gums with just a clean finger or a nice little soft cloth. And then there's also the use of over-the-counter pain medication, depending on what age your child is, Tylenol, and then over 6 months, Advil. And the reality is we want to prevent those teeth from hurting or the teeth coming through from hurting. We want your baby to be less fussy. We also want to prevent them from choking or strangulating.
Right.
And so how do you do that is you don't use the things that can do that. So that's my first one that I have some energy, let's call it energy towards. I think that's a more positive feeling instead of the other things that do come across my mind. And I will tell you, lots of parents come in with them. And majority of them tell me they don't work. It's not working. It's not working. And I'm like, how much did you spend? Let's talk about that. Ugh. So
let's give you some real tools that do work. So give me two more top products. Start with another one.
So of the ones that I listed, let's talk about, there is one I've done Instagram on, but there's one that I have not. And I think you referenced, the strollers. The other ones are we call them the baby jumpers, the suspended baby jumpers.
Okay.
They're being marketed as like this fun and beneficial way for infants to, quote unquote, develop motor skills by allowing them to bounce in a harness that's attached to a doorway or a frame. In that statement alone, there's a lot of things that come to my head where it's one, you're letting them bounce. They're usually probably not overly developed yet with their lower extremities, and it's attached to a frame and a doorway. And you want that to hold your child. So they can pose a risk for falls, head injuries, developmental issues due to improper use of their legs, and then also a risk of the device detaching from the doorway or frame, leading to injuries. And when we talk about the overuse, we talk about like muscle imbalance and delayed motor skill development, and may actually encourage unnatural movement patterns that don't actually align with developmental milestones. So we don't want that to happen. We understand that parents are tired and they're like, maybe I can just put my child there for 5 minutes, 10 minutes. But we also know that's where injuries start. It's, I left them there for a minute. I left them there for 2 minutes. I don't know what happened. How could this happen? And so if you're thinking about the standard jumper, suspended jumper, all I say is think about these things. And then the thing is, what would I recommend is just, you can promote motor skills quite easily in infants just by including, the supervised tummy time at a certain age, floor play, age appropriate toys that encourage reaching, rolling, crawling, anything that causes grabbing and lifting that's safe without super sharp corners, preferably. Because then if not, you'll be looking up Parachute Canada for, head injuries and all that fun stuff. And that also just allows them to be encouraging interactive play. And sometimes in a day like today, where we have become very much about pushing our children to be distracted, it almost, I have to say this, parents, it almost forces you to spend that extra 10 minutes with your child during that time. And I think that's super important. So that's my number 2.
Definitely. Okay. And
Last but not
Lastly,
least, and I think you have all heard me talk about this, is this lovely contraption. So what scares parents the most that they bring them in running into the ER, or what scares parents because they don't always feel well equipped to handle it, is choking. So choking is
yeah, that can be frightening.
very scary. When you think of choking, you think worst case scenario. Most parents, I learned, do not have full first aid CPR courses. And if they do, they still in the moment do not feel well equipped or safe. So guess what happened? Company created this thing called the LifeVac. It's being promoted as an emergency device designed to clear airway obstructions during choking incidents, particularly in children. So they have taken something that scares parents. They have taken it to the point of we've created something, a group, have created something that will, not a problem, save your child. Here are the issues with this. There is limited scientific evidence supporting the efficacy of this product called LifeVac. Most of the available evidence is anecdotal. So what parents have said, people have said, and for all we know, we don't know. Marketing is very easy to put a picture of a child and a blurb, but we don't know because there's no regulation saying they have to record their cases and report how it was used and if it was efficacious. And then the studies that were done even before were limited in sample size. They were not standard conditions. So imagine mannequins, cadavers, and those that were using it had a medical background, had a medical experience. So it wasn't like any parent who would take time trying to understand what to do with this piece of equipment. It was someone who was familiar with the equipment. So here's the big thing. In April 2024, the FDA actually issued a communication response saying that the safety and efficacy of the over-the-counter anti-choking devices, or this one in particular and any similar one, had not been established and they were not FDA approved or cleared. So that tells you in itself. I have not seen an update, just so you know. Since then, I keep clicking to see if I see one, just to make sure I'm not speaking out of term, because by the time this comes out, that may be changed. But the reality is, my concern as a physician in the emergency room is that relying on such a device, has shown to provide false sense of safety amongst parents, which then delays the, use of well-established, effective first aid techniques of back blows, abdominal thrusts, CPR, which is recommended by every health organization in the world: American Red Cross, American Heart Association, Canadian Pediatric Society, AAP. And so the reality is one, if you want to buy it, by all means, you want to feel safe, but know how to do the proper techniques first. Get into a first aid course. Get into a CPR course, because that is false safety. There's lots of parts to it. One, you don't get training on it. You're sent a mask that is both pediatric and adult, and that pediatric mask, there's no practice mask. So once you've used that package once, you have to ask for another one. Also, it doesn't come prepackaged. So in the time that you see your child choking and you decide you want to get this, you have to unpackage, put it together, feel confident you know how to use it. And there has been shown that there could be harm done where it actually worsens what's going on. So the reality is just think about things you can do to prevent choking in the first place, and have your first step of first aid ready to go, and renew it is the big thing. Is don't just let it go for years and say, I know what I'm doing. And then be stuck in that fearful position of what do I do now? And it's absolutely scary. And I want to clarify, I'm not saying that something like this may not be in our future. I am saying right now, as someone who sees this and deals with this, it is not the safest approach. It is not a first line approach, and it is not supported because we don't really have pediatric data that says it's okay to use this.
Right. And I think that goes back to a couple of your main points around, rely on something that we do know is effective, because we don't want to scare parents. We want them to be empowered. We want them to know that they actually have the power to take action if they are trained. And we absolutely encourage everybody to be trained. So I think that's a really key message. And sometimes the simple and straightforward and not needing a device, may be depending on the situation, may be the right thing to do. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast for this episode. We could talk for hours, I'm sure. So the good news for podcast listeners is that there are so many questions that we couldn't address them all on this episode. So both Dr. Tash and I are going to be live on a TikTok or Instagram live session sometime in the near future. So watch for more information. Make sure to join us. And most importantly, bring us your questions because we want you to have the right answers. Thanks, Dr. Tash.
Thank you so much for having me again.
Thanks so much for listening to this episode. Popping the Bubble Wrap is a podcast of Parachute, Canada's national injury prevention charity. We release episodes monthly. Visit us at parachute.ca and follow us on Instagram and Facebook at Parachute Canada. Don't keep us a secret, though. Help other parents find this podcast by sharing the link to Popping the Bubble Wrap and taking a second to submit a review. It really does help. Popping the Bubble Wrap is produced by Story Studio Network.